In muscle activation techniques, what we believe is that tightness is a symptom. It's sort of like the cough to the cold. The virus that's actually causing the cold is muscle weakness, or the inability for the muscles to generate tension optimally. So instead of trying to just remove the tension, what we try to do is restore the contractile capabilities of the muscle, and in return, the body will allow more range of motion to occur in the joint motions that are being created by the muscles that have been activated.
Hey folks, it's Mike Mutzel here with highintensityhealth.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today we're at episode number 102, and we have Brandon O'Connor with us, and he's a muscle restoration specialist, and he's going to tell us about his muscle activation technique and also talk about activating different muscles to stimulate the vagal nerve, and that's something we talk about on the show a lot, and it's so beneficial for calming down our stress response and improving digestion and gut health, so you're going to learn some tips there. So Brandon, thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me, Mike. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you today.
Fantastic. Let's kind of dive into your specialty, muscle activation technique, and your role as a muscle restoration specialist. Maybe if you could talk about what that is and how you got into this field.
Yeah, so my background is in personal training and exercise. That's where how I originally got started and got interested in the muscle system. And what ended up happening was I was doing personal training sessions with clients, I noticed, that some clients would get better with exercise and other clients wouldn't. They wouldn't improve as well or as quickly as I'd like them to improve, or they'd complain of kind of chronic aches and pains or muscle tightness. And so I was trying all kinds of different strategies early in my career to kind of help them out with these problems, and so I was stretching people and doing, some of the more traditional stuff, foam rolling and and again, that and combined with exercise for a lot of people is fine. And then a lot of people just weren't doing as well. And so I'm a very extreme learner by nature. And so I like to get out there and kind of see everything that's out there. And so when I came across muscle activation techniques and was explained the kind of the thought process and the philosophy behind it, it was like a eureka moment, like a light bulb just went off my head. It was like, this is it. I could see it right away. Everything about it made sense. It made sense from a client management standpoint and being able to, kind of alter the system of people in a really safe and effective way standpoint. I just was all in from the get-go.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So maybe let's kind of talk about, people are familiar with physical therapy and personal training and stuff like that, but how is muscle activation and your role as a muscle restoration specialist, how is that kind of different from maybe, say, things like trigger point therapy and myofascial release and physical therapy?
Yeah, so a couple different ways that it's really different. The first way is that I kind of describe muscle activation techniques, and especially like the initial assessment, as kind of like a forensic investigation of the body, right? So instead of just trying to figure out, okay, we know that, for example, somebody has like a chronic condition like chronic back pain. And in most traditional therapies, what they typically do is they go, okay, you got a chronic back symptom, let's just work on the back. Let's do stretching for the back or myofascial release for the back or exercises for the back. Well, the way that muscle activation technique is different is because we've got this kind of very specific and systematic range of motion examination that kind of allows us to start seeing how the body's moving throughout all of the different joints and their kind of interrelationships. We can kind of determine whether or not the symptom is where the local problem is, or if it's originating somewhere else in the body, and that place might need to be addressed first. The other way that that's extremely different is that everybody is always saying to people, you're tight, you got to get rid of this tightness. Well, in muscle activation techniques, what we believe is that tightness is a symptom. It's sort of like the cough to the cold. The virus that's actually causing the cold is muscle weakness, or the inability for the muscles to generate tension optimally. So instead of trying to just remove the tension, what we try to do is restore the contractile capabilities of the muscle, and in return, the body will allow more range of motion to occur in the joint motions that are being created by the muscles that have been activated. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it really does. And there's a great video on the website, the MAT website. And I think maybe you could talk us through this. So a lot of people have low back pain and they think, oh, it's low back pain because my hamstrings are tight. So I need to stretch my hamstrings. But there are some different. So talk about okay, so a lot of people do, sit a lot. They do have tight hamstrings, low back pain, but why should they not stretch their hamstrings?
Right. So the kind of the way that we would look at that is okay, so let's say like you're in the gym, right? And you're working with your personal trainer and you tell your personal trainer, hey, I've got a tight hamstring. Okay. And that's a pretty common complaint, like you said, especially with people with low back pain. So let's say the trainer then has you actively lift your leg up and you hit a point in the range of motion where you're like, man, my hamstring feels so tight, I don't feel like I can move any further. Well, the way that we would look at that is it's not the hamstring being tight, it's the muscles on the other side of the joint being weak. So if you can't flex your hip, it's not because your hamstring or your lower back is tight, it's because potentially your hip flexor muscles that actually lift the leg and the abdominal muscles which kind of work in a supportive action might potentially be weak. And then we've got a very specific way that we can determine that, and that's through actually testing various positions that relate to muscles that create actions in hip flexion or trunk flexion or really any muscle action in the body. We've got hundreds of muscle tests that can literally test the contractile capability of any muscle that crosses any joint in the body.
Wow. That's pretty fascinating. So for low back pain people or people with tight hamstrings, we just as an aside, Brandon, on the show, we talk a lot about doing full body movements, squats and deadlifts, and how they're so powerful for activating the core and boosting your metabolic rate and burning fat and so forth. So to really kind of alleviate some of that pressure on that lumbar region and kind of that tightness in the hamstring kind of glute area, what sort of hip flexion and or ab exercises or techniques do you recommend and advise to people?
Well, so the best way I can answer that question is you're right. Those exercises are awesome, right? The ones that ask the body to rapidly generate tension across multiple muscle groups. But the problem is for a lot of people, there's so many joints involved with those actions that if you've got one weak link in the chain, for example, let's say like on a deadlift, if you've got muscles that create an action at the hip that create extension are weak, now you're asking the body to have to pick up for those inefficiencies in those tissues and other muscles that might not be as good at creating that action. So, for example, the low back might start having to try and generate tension to pick up for inefficiencies in the contractional capabilities of like the glute musculature. And so the way I always answer that question is that in order to become as efficient as you can at getting the benefit from those types of kind of full body exercises, you got to make sure that all the pieces that create that action are all doing their job really, really well. And so that's kind of what we do with MAT is we kind of evaluate the body and make sure that those individual pieces are all doing their job properly. That way that when you create an integrated exercise experience like a deadlift or a squat or whatever, there isn't any inefficient pieces that might be limiting your performance. So kind of the way that I would do it is make sure that all the pieces are in place, and if they're not, go ahead and address those pieces and get those pieces activated. Reinforce that those weak pieces via either isolated isometric exercise or isolated joint movements, maybe with some more machine-based work, and then progress to these really beneficial kind of total body exercises.
So what you're saying is don't really jump into it, especially under load, because you can, without proper evaluation, other things may compensate, which can cause injury.
Yes, and what will happen is yes, you can potentially be injured, and then the other problem is that if you've got muscles that are working well and you got muscles that aren't working well, and then you put them in a scenario where you're having to, kind of rapidly generate tension across multiple muscle groups, the ones that are working well will become more and more and more innervated and strong through the nervous system, and the ones that aren't are going to become even weaker and weaker and weaker. So it's sort of like you get super, super efficient at the tissues that are working and less efficient at the tissues that aren't. And again, that can lead to altered mechanics in your motion and eventually lead to chronic pain or potential injury.
That's interesting. I experienced that with my bicep, actually. It was coming from a tight tricep we figured out through a practitioner I've been working with here who does a lot of the kinetic chain work up through NASM. And so we're doing some different things. And so this bicep tendon was always hurting, but we found out it was really from the, shoulder / tricep scapula kind of tightness, which to me, a lot of people just think that they look at the site of the injury, the Achilles or the hamstring, like we're talking about, but it's often something related in that movement. And I think that's a new perspective. It's kind of more holistic and integrated and kind of systems thinking.
Yeah, it's all about root cause analysis. In my practice every day, people come in with all kinds of maladies and problems and stuff. And honestly, I'd say the majority of the time, wherever they're having the kind of the chronic reoccurring symptom is not the area where they're having the most dysfunction. More than likely, it's going to be somewhere else in the body. I mean, I've seen crazy stuff. I've seen people with, they come in with back and shoulder and neck stuff, and it's foot and lower leg limitations. I've seen people with foot and lower leg chronic conditions like plantar fasciitis, and it's because they can't generate tension in their hip musculature or their trunk. I mean, so it can go run the gamut all over the whole body.
Yeah, it's pretty neat because we talk about functional medicine a lot on the show, Brandon, and how something like allergies is really, from gut dysfunction, leaky gut, poor, dysbiosis and so forth. So it's really cool to kind of look at the body from the structural musculoskeletal standpoint and see kind of the same issues, that just because your foot hurts doesn't mean that the cause is at your foot. So I like how you explain that pretty well. Now, before we talk about the vagal nerve and activating different muscles that may help to innervate the vagal nerve and activate the calming branch of our nervous system, are there any kind of warm-up exercises or ways that, something that you recommend all your clients, before they go to the gym or do movements to kind of work into the movements and maybe activate the hip flexors and glutes?
Yeah, so that's a great question. All of my recommendations as far as exercise preparation for clients are client defined, where it's based on kind of what their individual, issues are. Everything I do is extraordinarily custom fit. But what I can tell you is that the best way to kind of prepare the body for exercise or for muscle stress is to actually start doing some tension generating in the muscles. So what I typically recommend are kind of low grade isometric based exercises that are potential pieces of some of these more complex movement excursions like you were describing earlier, like squatting and deadlifting and stuff. And so if a client wants to participate in that type of an exercise program, I typically have them do some very specific isometric based exercises to, again, shorten the muscles that they're going to be working in a kind of a very gentle fashion in order to prepare them for the exercise excursion that they're about to participate in. Because the fact of the matter is that muscle is very misunderstood. And what muscle does primarily is it generates tension to move and stabilize joints. And so the best way to prepare the body to generate tension to move joints is to have the muscles generate tension to move the joints, but maybe in a very isolated, kind of delicate way, to kind of almost tune up or turn up the nervous system a little bit, so that those individual pieces or weak points that we might be trying to address don't necessarily put the client in a potential position of vulnerability.
That sounds great. So one thing that I've been doing and recommended by a personal trainer I've worked with to help with my squat form was take bands and put them around my ankles and kind of walk with a wide step. So I'm really activating, my glutes, for example. Anything else? What about hip flexors? Should you do anything for the hip flexors before doing these multi-joint integrated movements?
Yeah, you absolutely can. A lot of gyms have really, really cool, machine technology that allows you to kind of isolate the hip flexors. You might have seen these. Cybex is a manufacturer that makes a really excellent piece called a rotary hip machine. It's like a wacky looking thing that you stand on, and that you can kind of put your knee on this pad, and you can kind of move the hip gently into flexion. And a lot of times what I'll do if I'm going to do some leg presses or squats or something is I'll go and warm up a little bit on that and kind of take my hip into an end range position of flexion and kind of just very gently hold it there for about 6 seconds, very gentle tension, and then kind of relax and then do it again. An easy way to do that if you didn't have access to a machine piece like that is you could just lie on your back, bring the knee towards your chest, one leg at a time, and just kind of focus on trying to kind of generate tension in that hip flexor region. Or you could do it with you can do that with either a bent knee or a straight leg. Just kind of lie there, take the leg up to kind of your natural, comfortable end range, kind of hold it there for about 5 or 6 seconds and relax. And then I typically do anywhere from like 4 to 6 sets of 6-second isometric kind of repetitions.
Cool. That's awesome. There's a couple of good books, and I wanted to get your opinion on this. Supple Leopard, I think, is one that I have, and then Core Performance by Mark Verstingen. What are your thoughts on those books, and any other good resources where people can kind of explore this a little deeper?
I know of those books. I don't own copies of them. I know that Supple Leopard is by a gentleman named, is it Kelly Starlett? Is that the gentleman's name?
I think so, yeah.
And I'm familiar with Mark Verstegen as well. He's got a world-class performance gym in Tempe, Arizona, where he works with a lot of professional athletes. What I can tell you is the one thing I know is that I think that the Supple Leopard is all about creating increases in joint mobility, which is great. I mean, obviously, if you've got joints that aren't moving very well, a lot of times you want to create better mobility so that you can, participate in exercise and be able to move better. But the one thing I can say in regards to joint mobility is that you don't want to have joint mobility without joint stability. Okay, and what I mean by that is if you increase the ability for the muscles to move you into a joint position, without those muscles being able to optimally generate tension, I always say to my clients every day, mobility without stability equals vulnerability. Okay, so what I mean by stability is, can the muscles at those end range positions in the joints generate tension optimally? And if they can't, and you try and force that joint motion beyond what you currently can actively control, and you open up more range of motion, and there's not muscular tension generating capabilities at those end ranges, you're vulnerable. That's all there is to it. You're vulnerable. Wow. And for world-class athletes and even a lot of weekend warrior type athletes, not that big of a deal a lot of times, okay? Because the nervous system wiring of those types of people is so efficient that they can compensate and get away with it. But if that happens to a person that's already kind of in a chronic state, might be dealing with some chronic inflammation, is recovering from an injury, has got chronic pain, now we're putting the body in a situation where that increased mobility creates significantly more risk than reward.
Wow. Beautifully said. That makes a lot of sense. So that's why people should work with a practitioner if they fall. Well, pretty much anyone. I mean, if you're training your body hard, doing squats, deadlifts, I mean, even if you're not a weekend warrior, you're just working out 3 days a week, I think you should get a tune-up with a practitioner.
No doubt. And I always tell people, it's like, I always do this analogy. It's like driving your car, right? If you're going to just tootle around the neighborhood, probably don't need a lot of maintenance to that car. You're going to take it and drive it on the track 95 miles an hour all the time, probably going to need a little bit more maintenance. So that's where, muscle activation technique specialists and other people practicing other modalities can kind of come in and help you maintain the integrity of your body so that you can keep driving that car 95 miles an hour.
Yeah, great analogy. So what about foam rollers and things of that sort to help with some of the fascia and maybe scar tissue buildup?
Yeah, another great question. So as far as I know, the idea being that the foam rolling and the fascial release and all that stuff is done in order to create increases in mobility and decrease tension. But again, we got to come back to fundamentally, what do muscles do, right? They generate tension to stabilize and control joints. And so if the body is creating tension in a specific area, like people always say, I'm so tight in my hip, or I'm so tight in my shoulder. There's a lot of times there's a very specific reason why that's happening. And it's almost like a built-in protective mechanism of the body. It's the body's way of saying, okay, the muscles that control, let's say the shoulder joint here, they're not doing their job so good. They're not, they've lost some communication with the nervous system, maybe due to stress, and that can cover all forms of stress, trauma, acute and chronic, and then overuse. And the body goes, these muscles aren't doing their job so good, so we're going to go ahead and tighten those guys up so this joint can't move as well as it normally could. So if you try and take those muscles that are in that kind of hyperprotective state and you kind of try and get those guys to loosen up, a lot of times the body goes, whoa, what are you doing to me? I've got this, I'm tightening these guys up for a reason. I'm trying to get these guys, trying to protect this joint here. And so sometimes when you try and do any kind of release to those muscles without, figuring out whether or not there's a problem in their tension generating capabilities, either A, you're going to just get kind of like a temporary symptom relief, or B, it's that whole mobility stability thing. You're potentially putting that joint in a position of vulnerability. But again, like as far as those things is, it's to me the biggest benefit I think is with massage and potentially foam rolling is more the relaxation end of the spectrum, the shifting of the body from this kind of fight or flight mode to this more parasympathetic dominant kind of relaxation mode. That my clients ask about massage all the time. That's what I always tell them is that the best use is not as a corrective tool, but as a kind of a relaxation tool.
Yeah, perfect. So to kind of summarize, really focus on strengthening the muscles that oppose the weak or the tight muscles. So again, going back to that analogy of the hamstring, tight hamstrings, don't focus on really stretching, but focus on strengthening
the opposite side of the joint. Yep. Perfect. And that goes for any area of the body, any place where you feel like where the muscles feeling or getting the sensation of stretch when you're moving into a position. A lot of times it's not where you're feeling stretch. It's what's happening on the other side of the joint.
Great info. Awesome. So let's dive into the nitty gritty here about the vagal nerve, and maybe just a quick overview of the vagal nerve and what organs that innervates, and then what muscles kind of affect the vagal nerve activation.
Yeah, so as far as I know, vagal nerve, incredibly important in the regulation of digestion, blood pressure, heart rate. It's a key for a lot of people, from what I understand, to shift the body from the kind of fight or flight sympathetic state to the parasympathetic. And like you're talking about functional medicine, and work with the functional medicine practitioner in Austin, and we have a lot of discussions about this kinds of things. And what we're finding is that she's letting me know is that in a lot of people, the dysfunction of that nerve is a major player in a lot of, gut issues and digestion and stuff like that. And so what I've been just experimenting with lately is just trying to access muscles that can't be tested as directly as some of the other muscles in the body. All the ones that are kind of like the scaffolding of the body that are kind of on the, outside are very easy to test. We can kind of test those directly. Some of the ones that are more deep inside the body, I've been trying to kind of figure out some indirect ways to test those. And, the vagal nerve has innervation to, the muscles of some of the muscles of the tongue, the muscles of the voice box and the larynx. And so I've just kind of been playing a little bit recently in my practice of just trying to create some ways to help people improve the tension generating capabilities of those muscles.
Interesting. That's fascinating. So that was Alejandra Carrasco, and
yeah,
listening there, wondering, that was episode number 98, I believe. So if y'all want to learn more about heart math and different ways to kind of the top down approaches to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, that calming, rest and digest, she had a lot of great practical tips on that. So Brandon, let's kind of get into the nitty gritty here. So if someone is listening and they want to improve their digestion, I think you have some stories about some people you've been working with, that have had improvements in gut health and digestion after this. So how could maybe people massage, or what sort of work are you doing to these
I'm not directly touching the areas where these muscles attach. They run so deep inside of the inside of the neck, and behind the voice box. I can't actually access them directly. What I've been having some clients do is kind of generating tension and kind of isometric contractions in other areas, and then having them move activate their voice box via humming and some other things, just to kind of see if we can get some improvements, or some activation of some of those kind of hard to reach muscles. So if somebody wanted to try it, you could bend your elbow like you're doing a bicep curl up here, and just kind of hold that there, and then kind of do like a little bit of a kind of like a humming sound, just to try and see if you can get some of those auditory muscles, online. See if you could get those a little bit stimulated. And that's just one thing I've been playing with, and kind of testing that position directly, like I would, if I was just doing a regular bicep test, to see if there's a kind of an indirect way to get some of that stuff turn back on. But I have been seeing it in some of my clients have been playing with it recently in my practice, and it's just like any other muscle testing processes that we'll see it on kind of one side of the body, not the other. Weaknesses on one side of the body, or indication of weakness on one side. So it's just something interesting I've just kind of been playing with recently.
Yeah. And what was the point of holding the bicep, contracting it while doing kind of the oming? What did that do?
It's just kind of a way to kind of like create again, when you can't access a muscle directly, you got to kind of find an indication of that muscle's function elsewhere in the body. And so sometimes what can happen is, if you've got a muscle that's working well, like let's say your elbow flexors, or a position of elbow flexion, you can test that position in conjunction with trying to shorten another muscle indirectly, and sometimes that can give you an indication of the function of the muscle that you can't access more directly. We do this all the time in MAT with specifically with like the jaw musculature and some of the other stuff. There's actually a name for this. It's called therapy localization. What that means is that you touch another area of the body, or you use another area of the body to indicate whether there's potential weaknesses in hard to reach muscle groupings. And so, like I said, we use it. I've just started playing with it with the voice box. We've been using it in our community with the jaw musculature for years, touching the jaw and using the arm or the elbow as an indication of the function of the musculature of the jaw. It seems to work incredibly well. I've been able to clear a lot of TMJ problems and various upper cervical issues, using indirect muscle testing. So it definitely works.
Oh, that's fascinating. Gotcha. So to kind of summarize there, if these deeper, larynx and muscles behind the voice box that innervate the vagal nerve, if they were not firing optimally, then an easy test your bicep would kind of go weak. Is that what you're saying? If someone was
So if I'm going to test a muscle indirectly, whether it be that something up in that area, or the jaw, or anything else we can't use directly, what I'll do is I'll test a position that I know is already testing strong, and then I'll have them create a generation of tension in another, and like let's say in the voice box, I'll have them do like a low hum. And then I'll see if that position that was once strong suddenly tests weak. And if it does, I'm like, oh, okay, indirectly there's an indication that maybe there's something wrong up there. If I go to the other side and test strong, well, I have them hum. I'm like, oh, okay, well maybe that side, is working just fine. Muscles are throughout the whole body are bilateral. You've got on the spinal cord, you've got innervations on each side. So, in the different hemispheres of the body. So you've got, a bicep, short head on the right, bicep short head on the left, and same thing in the jaw and the auditory muscles. You've got one on the left, one on the right. So using sides of the body can indicate if the potential weakness is on one side or the other.
Wow, that's awesome. So people can work with their training partner or spouse and try and activate do the low hum and try and activate the vagal nerve. So
yeah, you can try and see if that could it could potentially create some benefit. I mean, because as far as I know, the functional medicine community right now, some of the recommendations for creating a stimulation of that nerve is like low humming and singing and gargling and doing some other things, and all those actions are that's just different ways of trying to create muscle stimulation. This is just maybe a little bit more of a direct way to actually, get a true indication if there is dysfunction in those tissues.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome, Brandon. Great find there. Now, before we go to final questions, anything about muscle activation or muscle restoration that we didn't get to talk about, but that you want to share with our listeners?
The number one thing is I can tell you is that I believe muscle activation techniques is kind of the ultimate way to prepare the body for any movement-based activity, or just to improve the movement capabilities of your body so you can just live a better, more comfortable life. Like I was saying before, the whole point of the muscle system is to generate tension, to control and stabilize joints. And so, that plays a major role in health, because if those muscles aren't generating tension optimally, and you start getting, chronic muscle tightness, because indirectly you're getting a lot of chronic muscle weakness, well, that's gonna create a significant detriment over time in your health status, and it's also going to create some potential chronic low-grade inflammation. So by restoring the health of the neuromuscular system, that plays a huge role in the health of the whole body. And the brain devotes more motor neurons to the muscle system than any other system in the body. And so in the hierarchy of the brain, motor, neuron, that's what I'm looking for. Motor neuron,
unit or a complex, or
focus, or in that hierarchy, the muscle system is number one. It comes number one. So making sure that the muscle system I just think is incredibly crucial if you truly want to be a healthy person.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And our muscle does so much. From whole body glucose disposal to changes in resting metabolic rate, our mitochondria, where we burn fat. There's so many benefits. I think, what we're seeing about all the focus, resurgence and new understanding about the gut microbiome and the gut, I think is really hot right now. But in the next 5-10 years, we're already starting to see it, that muscle is coming back. It's not just, having a six-pack and looking good on the beach. Muscle contributes to physiology in so many different ways. And so it's important to have healthy muscle. And we see muscle dysfunction in diabetes. You get the intramyofascial lipid deposition and reduce, leptin and insulin receptors and all this crazy stuff. So that's why we try and encourage muscle health. And techniques like you're sharing here, Brandon, have been awesome to help people move better and more freely. So thanks for sharing that. Now, one of the couple of questions that we ask every guest on the show is, the first one is, what's your morning routine? We know you have a busy practice in Austin, Texas, and you've been personal training for quite some time and stuff like that. So what does your morning look like?
I try and get up about an hour and a half before I need to be at the office. The main way I try and start my day every day is with gratitude. That's the most important thing to me. Is like, if I get into a state of gratitude, you can't be stressed and you can't have fear and anxiety if you're in gratitude. So I get up every day, write in my journal, talk about, I put some things that I'm grateful for. Do a little bit of meditation, a little prayer. Try and, start shifting my physiology, maybe do a little bit of breathing, deep breathing, or I'll get out my M wave, do a little heart rate variability training, kind of just start priming the body to get everything going. Shower, clean up, and then I'm a big believer in kind of a low carb, more ketogenic diet. And I think that it's real important to kind of start the day without the presence of any carbohydrate load. So I'll typically get up and make a high-fat breakfast, bacon and avocado, or I'll make a coffee drink, sort of like bulletproof coffee, which I know has gotten real popular. Except I use coconut, full-fat coconut milk, and maybe a little bit of collagen-based protein powder instead. And then I, try and get to the office a few minutes early, get everything prepped for my clients, make sure everything's ready to go, make sure the environment's ready to go, and then I'm just ready to roll, start my day.
That's awesome. We recently had this episode number 103 is going to be with Alex Ferretti, and he's a practitioner in the UK. And I wanted to share this story with you, Brandon. So he's been doing a lot of experimenting, getting keto adapted and how that affects his exercise performance. But he also noted dramatic improvements and increase in heart rate variability over time as he got more and more keto adapted. And so there may be some role that ketones play in, again, activating this vagal nerve and calming down the sympathetic branch of the nervous system. So
no doubt. I completely agree with that. I think that, and this is a much deeper dive, but I think that one of the biggest problems that people are struggling with every day is just they're constantly bombarding their body with way too much glucose. And again, so you throw that on top of things like, in my scope of practice, an inefficient muscular system, and you got a recipe for disaster there for a lot of folks.
Yeah, that's great. So do you measure, ketones in the blood or urine, or do you just follow the, basically a high fat, low carb diet?
I used to do a lot more of the keto stick measurements and stuff. But for the most part, I do just kind of follow the whole high carb, low fat diet. I just found for myself, through a lot of trial and errors, that I don't tolerate carbohydrate very well, even though I'm exercising and moving my body a lot. And so I kind of use carbohydrate as a kind of, refeeding, calming, kind of carb backloading kind of deal after workouts or only in the evenings. Like, I don't really eat any glucose-based food at all during the day, just because I feel like it affects my mental and physical performance so much. And because my job, the nature of my work is so physically and mentally demanding, I just, I'm always just trying to stay in a state of high performance. And so I kind of try to avoid that because I know it doesn't work for me. And that doesn't mean it doesn't work for everybody, but it doesn't work for me.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. It's funny. When you get rid of the carbs, your energy gets more and more consistent and you don't get these fluctuations. Even with clean carbs, I noticed that, I would have a lot of sweet potatoes and yams and squash and during the winter and stuff like that when I would, lifting heavier and kind of bulking, so to speak. And man, your energy just totally just ebbs and flows. And so just trying to get into more keto adapted state, with the higher fat, you definitely have a more even energy flow, which is pretty cool. And so, like you said, I mean, like myself doing interviews or working on blog posts and writing books and stuff like that, it's nice to have a very steady energy throughout the day. So give that a shot, folks. Now, Brandon, if there was one herb, nutrient, botanical, or dietary supplement that you just could not live without, and you're maybe going to be stranded on a desert island, what would this substance be and why?
I'm not a big supplement guy. I do high quality whey proteins after workouts, but the one that I honestly couldn't live without, or that I find it to be extraordinarily beneficial, is mineral water. I love mineral water. Down here in Texas, we get a mineral water called Topo Chico. It's only available in like 37 states. It's imported from Mexico. It's fantastic. We always joke they put some sort of addictive substance in it because you just want to drink so much of it. But with the mineral water, you get a lot of times you get a bunch of a lot of different minerals, sulfates and magnesium and different things. And I find that midday when I'm starting to just maybe have a little bit of a lull, I go to the fridge in my office, grab a mineral water, start drinking that. I start feeling better, more focused.
That's awesome. So it's Topo Chico, is it?
Topo, T-O-P-O, Chico.
Awesome.
It's actually been around for a really, really, really long time, since the, sometime in the 1800s. It comes from a spring down there somewhere in Mexico, and it's apparently has some sort of medicinal properties, but it's extremely popular down here in Austin, Texas. You can get it almost at any restaurant, and all the convenience stores carry it, and we go through about at least a case per week. My significant other drinks about 3 or 4 days. She's completely hooked.
That's awesome. Well, that's something. It's better to be hooked on like mineral water or kombucha than beer and whiskey, I guess, right?
Right on, man. Absolutely.
That's funny. So if you were to bump shoulders with Barack Obama or a future president and just had 30 seconds to bend their ear on one very important lifestyle or health tip, what would you want to share with them and why?
It's a really good question. I kind of have a different way I want to answer this, if it's okay.
Sure.
The one thing that I would ask that they would do, instead of giving advice, which a lot of times falls on deaf ears, there's a lot of ways you can get people to change habits. Okay, and there's a lot of things that motivate people psycho-emotionally, and one of the things that motivates people psycho-emotionally tremendously is money. And so what I would honestly ask that they do is create some sort of initiative where if you go to a physician and get a report that shows that your blood work is excellent, you're at a healthy BMI, you're just in an excellent state of health status, you can get a $5,000 or $10,000 tax credit every single year. And I think that would help people to get motivated, to get healthy, lose weight more than anything else, that they could say about any one specific, health, tip or piece of advice, because we have an epidemic in this country with obesity, and it's eventually going to, create significant strain on our healthcare costs. And I think that if healthy people could actually get rewarded for being healthy, maybe more people would be motivated to become healthy.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, that's beautiful advice. And we've kind of talked about food a lot, but no one's ever put it in that perspective when it comes to money. And you're right. I mean, money motivates people, and that's why a lot of people buy homes. You can write off the mortgage interest and stuff like that. So if you could write off, showing improvements in your blood work, I mean, that'd be amazing.
Yeah. So then all of a sudden it's like maybe, okay, they have to give out these tax credits, but then all of a sudden if our healthcare costs started progressively dropping, I guarantee you they would make that trade 100 times out of 100.
Right. Yeah, I think it's 20% of our GDP is allocated towards healthcare expenditures, and it's increasing. And, it's we're spending a lot of money on diseases like heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and autoimmunity, things that are treatable through lifestyle, changes in nutrition and exercise. So great tip there, Brandon. So I think our listeners are going to want to learn a little bit more about you and where you practice. So what's the best online resource for people can reach out to you?
You can visit my website, austinmusclerestoration.com, where you can visit my Twitter, which is @musclerestored.com. And those are probably the best places if you want to learn more about me individually and kind of what I do. If you don't live in Austin, Texas, and just are interested in learning more about muscle activation techniques and to be able to potentially find a practitioner in your area that could, help potentially help you with some of your muscle-based needs, you could go to muscleactivation.com, and there's great practitioners all over the country that are doing outstanding work with people and really truly helping people to restore the health of their bodies via their muscle systems with this process.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I went on the website last night and typed in my zip code, and there's a lot of practitioners in the area. So,
yeah, I know. I'm good friends with some of the guys in your area. A couple of excellent practitioners in the Seattle area.
That's great. Well, Brandon O'Connor, thank you so much for coming on the show. And for those that are listening, if you want to watch this on YouTube, you can go to highintensityhealth.com and type in Brandon, find the show notes, information about his practice, and Twitter and Facebook handles that he mentioned there. So thanks again for coming on the show, Brandon. Hope you have a great day.
Thanks for having me. It was awesome.